So, and you're going to see more of this. You're going to see more. We call them lone wolf attacks. I think that's a dangerous thing to do, because what it does is it causes law enforcement and the intelligence community to dismiss this as an isolated attack, right?
Yeah.
When in reality.
Okay, so in the book, you talk about things that people can do to prepare, and specifically what they should do on the ground in local communities. Talk about that for a second.
I want to start by saying I am not qualified to tell people what to do in a terror attack.
And one of the things I talked about at Stanford last week was stay in curiosity, stay out of judgment, right?
Yeah.
Part of this is we need to be curious about each other. We need to be curious about where people, part of the reason we do this podcast, we get people's life stories, right? And specifically, we do that so that we can get to know our neighbors. We can get to know people better.
Your Glock and your AK and your trick out your vest and your anti-hemorrhaging kit. And I'm not making light of it. Like, I get it. But how about you just read the analysis and look at scenario-based case studies to say, all right, this is kind of what the individual and collective requirement would look like if my neighborhood 1 mile from Houston were hit.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using NewCalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
Scott Mann, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience the third time. This is amazing, man. I love having you back.
Repeat.
Everything in your
I'm a
life is
three-peat.
perpetual motion, and I'm so excited to have you here. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it, just like we've done with you before. Today, we're going to talk about your play that's coming up. We're going to talk about a book that you're writing. We're going to talk about The Gathering Storm, and specifically, I want to talk about kind of what all is happening in your life and how people can participate and be a part of this movement that you're creating. Thanks again for being here, bud.
Thanks, Mike. Your platform is amazing. And I can't thank you enough for, giving myself and others a voice on your platform. Your interview with Sarah was great. And you're growing like crazy. It's reflective of that. You are tapped into storytelling and authentic engagement. And I think your numbers reflect it, right, on your growth as a podcast. So thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man, I'm so proud of you. And I try not to get into this because I get emotional, but I'm really, really proud of you. To do what you're doing takes a lot. Okay. It takes a lot. And I don't think you're acknowledged enough for it, to be honest with you. You're stepping out in a way and giving back in a way that you didn't have to do. You know what I mean? I know you feel compelled and I know you feel like it's your mission and that type of thing. The thing is, you didn't have to, man. You were retired. You could have just, gone on into obscurity, so to speak, right? But you're not doing that. You're taking the slings and the arrows and you're standing up for what you believe is right, which is exactly what your dad taught you to do. Rex told you to leave tracks, and you're doing it, man. And I'm proud of you. And I know he is.
Thank you. Thank you. And that means a lot. I appreciate it. I try to just be Rex and Anita's son,
Right.
I think that's the best I can be. And they raised me a certain way. And one of those things was to leave tracks, you know. And my dad, even now, as he fights for his life, is still in between, you know, treatments. He's talking about the American chestnut and what he needs to do next. And, you know, the thing about my folks that they instilled in me is both of them at 80, you know, they're running full out. Even their bodies are betraying them. In some ways, their minds are starting to betray them, but they're still running full out, and it's in the service of others. It's in this pursuit of relevance, right?
Yeah.
Being relevant to the people they serve, and just skidding that car in sideways at the end of the game. And honestly, that's just all I want to do for my time, is to just try to be relevant to the people that I serve, and to be a voice, an authentic voice for that, and to just kind of go where my higher power tells me to go. So I appreciate it. I try not to screw up too much each day, but you know, it's the struggles that teach us anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
No, it's true, man. It's true. Now, real quick, I know your dad's battling for his life, and I know he's, you know, giving it everything he's got, right? And he's trying to recover and fighting this. In honor of him, I'd like to have you tell a story. It's one of my favorite stories about your dad, and it's where he goes to the White House and he convinces, well, tell the story. Tell the story about how he convinces the President of the United States to do something.
Well, so my dad, Rex, I call him the woodsman.
Yeah.
He's in my assessment, he's one of the great. He's just an icon. He's one of these men that always got big stuff done behind the scenes. He never looked for accolades or fame, but he spent nearly over 4 decades in the U.S. Forest Service. Much of that time as a wildland firefighter. And he fought and led some of these big fires, like the Yellowstone fire, the Biscuit fire, the fire in Oregon. I mean, big mega fires. And he, you know, from very humble beginnings as a sharecropper for tobacco in North Carolina, he emerged as he was one of the top 2 or 3 firefighters in the country for wildland fire. He was the go-to guy. He was an incident management team leader, regional fire team leader. And he, you know, the way he led his fires, the way he ran his fires was iconic and very humble, servant leadership-esque. And it was on one particular fire where George Bush was President George Bush Jr. showed up at the fire in Oregon. I think it was Oregon, and wanted a briefing, right? And they had a whole entourage with him. And my dad was running the fire, and he kind of, as he would always do, was trying to find his way to the front, to the line, to be with the guys and not be in the briefing. And Chief of the Forest Service said, "Nope, you're going to be there." The governor was there, this whole entourage. And so my dad was in this old gymnasium with the president, and the president, as he did, a very congenial guy, you know, engaged my dad before the briefing. And remember, like, there's this massive entourage following the president, all these bureaucrats and all these political muckety mucks, and, you know, upper echelon of the Forest Service in their crisp Forest Service uniforms. And, you know, dad's like in his yellow fire suit, you know. And so the president says, "Rex, tell me a little about yourself." And he tells, he's like, "My wife's a school teacher, and I've got 2 boys in the Army." And he stopped, you know, and he's like, "Everybody out." And he clears everybody out of the gym and said to my dad, "Tell me about your boys," you know. And so dad proceeded to tell him that, you know, he had 2 sons, one in special forces, one in the airborne, and one getting ready for Iraq, one in Afghanistan. And the president just was really moved by this, you know, and he just talked to my dad. And at some point in the conversation, he asked about the fires, these big mega fires. He said, "What's going on with this?" And my dad said, "Well, honestly, it'd be better if I showed you, Mr. President." And he was like, "Well, let's go." And so the Secret Service is like, you know, and they jump in their vehicles and they go bumbling up the side of the mountain. And he got out and he showed the president on one side of the road was a landscape that was, you know, the grass was still pretty green. You know, it was the fire had moved through the trees. And so that, you know, the forest was still intact. The forest floor was still intact. And then the other side looked like the landscape of the moon. You know, he like, "Now on this side, Mr. President, you had all the underbrush. There was no thinning. There was no management of the forest. On this side, it was managed. This is what it is, you know."
Right.
And the president's like, "I got it." Well, months later, dad's at the house, the fire's over, and mom comes walking in. She's like, "You have a phone call." And he's like, "Well, can you just take a message?" And she's like, "No, I think you want to take this one." And it was the White House inviting my dad to the Rose Garden for a signing of the Healthy Forest Initiative, that, he really inspired. And so he went, and the president and he had hit it off. And so they're taking a walk around the grounds, and he's just walking and talking with my dad. They're both outdoorsmen. And he was telling my dad about all the different trees. George Washington planted this tree, or he was a president. I don't think it was George Washington, because the White House came after that. But he was just telling the trees that were named after presidents.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad said, "Well, where's your tree, Mr. President?" And he said, "Well, I don't have one." He said, "Well, I have an idea for you." And so that was, enter the American chestnut. My dad
That's right.
never. And to this day, there is an American chestnut planted at the White House, as a result of that conversation. And the point here is that I think in terms of leadership, storytelling, is always available to us. Storytelling is what I call narrative competence, a way of using storytelling in real time. You talked about that recently in a post that you did at Stanford. So that's what my dad taught me. He taught me how to not just leadership, but the use of storytelling, as a way of being in the world, and a way of leading, and a way of getting big stuff done. And he did, and that tree is there now on the White House grounds, and very few people know the story why. But, and the Healthy Forest Initiative, the management of the woods, which could still be better. No one really knows the story behind that, but there definitely is one.
Well, and here's the thing, there's a story behind everything.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we have to do is we have to endeavor to tell the story, because if we don't, it won't get told. And one of the biggest things that I've learned from you is how compelling storytelling is. I mean, I've always been a storyteller. The men in my family, my dad, one of the best storytellers you ever met in your life. I pale in comparison, man. I'm not even near that man in terms of an ability to tell a story. The thing is, it's how we communicate. It's how we relate to each other. It's how we connect. And I want people to understand that a big, big part of this world, and I talked about it at Stanford last week, the big, big part of this world is we all need to connect. And we're not doing that right now.
Yeah, human connection is at the apex of, Brene Brown talks about this in her Power of Vulnerability TED Talk. She says that, human connection is why we exist. We are the most social creatures on the planet. And that's something I talk about in Nobody's Coming to Save You, is that in this time of churn, disconnection, division, distraction, disengagement that we're dealing with at epic levels. I mean, just look on the news. You see what it is unprecedented, the levels of disconnection. Well, we are wired to be social. We are wired to connect with one another. The saying that I use for rooftop leaders is, connect like your life depends on it, because it really does, even in these modern times. And understanding human connection, Mike, at our grandparents and their parents understood something now that neuroscientists are telling us unequivocally, which is we are wired for connection, and that's this human operating system. That I use an iceberg to show it, the tip of the iceberg, the modern world, the transactions, the rat race, these dopamine dispensers that we have our head in all the time. That's 20% of our humanity. 80% of what we need to actually filter, observe, learn, and navigate the world, this modern world, is below the waterline of that iceberg. It is the primal realities of our humanity. And a big, big, big chunk of that is storytelling, because the brain has a mandate to make sense of the world, and it uses storytelling to do that. Not data, not PowerPoint, not spreadsheets, not pitches. It uses narrative to make sense of things, metaphor. This is like that. This is like that. So the storytellers, and this isn't just basic storytelling, the skilled storytellers in this time of churn are going to have a competitive edge. How they influence, and so it's not just a kumbaya thing, man. Like, this is when I teach Green Berets, when I teach federal law enforcement, when I teach corporate executives or real estate or sales, it's like, hey, if you want to have an impact, if you want to teach, inspire, train, persuade, influence, engage, you have to be a storyteller, because that's what the brain uses to make sense of the world. Anything else is just a distraction.
Yeah. And the thing is, when you talk at people, you lose them. I use that story that you tell in Nobody's Coming to Save You all the time about how this corporation brought you in to be the keynote speaker, and you're standing off to the side of the stage and the CEO gets up and says, "I've got this slide deck. Will you tell that story for a second?"
Yeah, because this is something that I see all the time with PowerPoint and with presentations,
Mhm.
is that everything is a presentation. It's not a story.
Right.
So it's superficial. It's a facade, as you said. It's a mask.
Mhm.
And we've become so overly dependent on PowerPoint that it's ridiculous, and that it's actually turning people into insurgents in the audience.
Mhm.
Your people are pulling their phones out. I just told a mortgage company senior leadership the other day, I said, if you think that your people's phones aren't out during your talks, you're wrong. I just was watching you speak and I saw their phones out. You
Mhm.
know, they were just being very careful. And the reason is because I was at this banking convention and I was coaching some of the senior leaders on presenting to their folks at a leadership conference. And one of the most senior people in the room gets up there for the rehearsal. They have the slide deck come up and he's like, slide, slide, slide. Okay, I'm good. And he walks off. And I thought, man, this is not good. And sure enough, this guy gets up there when it's time for the conference. This is the senior ranking person, like a C-suite executive. Every phone in the room was out and he was oblivious to it because he was too busy reading his slides. He was too busy making these pontifications from his brain when his body was just completely AWOL. And the audience knew it and they checked out. And this is the reality we live in today. I mean, the average attention span of a human somewhere around 8 seconds. So if you don't go in and make a connection with kids as a teacher, with your prospect as a sales rep, with your people as an executive, you're going to lose them, and you're going to lose them fast. And the only
Yeah.
way to hold them and to get them and hold them is storytelling.
Yeah, you got to engage them, right? Even if all you do is get up in front of them and go, "Hey, if I had a story to tell you about this, would you be interested?" And everybody's sitting in the audience going, "Yeah," right? Now you got them.
I'll
You with
give you
me?
one even more. I'll give you one that's even more effective than that, if we can. Is
Absolutely.
rather than do that, just go right into the story.
Yeah.
Like rather than set it up with, would you be just don't even just go right to the story.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, the brain, because we've been telling stories for 70,000 years, Mike, the brain knows story
Yeah.
immediately,
Yeah.
especially if you pay attention to the design of the story, and if you pay attention to how you deliver the story.
Mhm.
This wonderful storyteller named Doug Lippman, he has this thing called the storyteller's triangle, and he says that, and this is one of the things I talk about in my new book on storytelling, is as the storyteller, as the presenter, as the teacher, as the parent, as the coach, you have two responsibilities in storytelling. You must have a relationship with your story, and you must have a relationship with your audience. That's your job. And if you do those two things, then the other leg of the triangle is the audience's relationship with your story. You
Mhm.
don't get to determine whether they buy into your story or not. That's the audience's choice.
Mhm.
And I see so many people today trying to overreach and tell people what to think. No, with storytelling, you just have a relationship to your story, right? You're immersed in it, you're connected to it, you're committed to it, and you have a relationship with your audience. And if you do those two things with full generosity, giving all of oneself to those two things, it is almost guaranteed that the audience will have a relationship with your story that binds them to you.
Yeah.
But it takes work, it takes practice. Like, it's not a casual thing,
Mhm.
particularly these days when we're so divided and there's so much PowerPoint and executives are taught a certain way to hold their hands and look at the back of the room. And we're disconnected, and
Yeah.
it's not good. It's getting worse.
Yeah. 1000%. We actually talked about it at Stanford last week. I told him, I said, if you have stage fright, love the people in the audience more than you love yourself, and you're going to be fine. Right?
Absolutely.
Just pour into them. Just pour into them. That's what you need to do. You'll
Yep.
connect, and you will have a success. You won't feel stage fright. You won't
Stage
feel
fright
nervous.
Stage fright in any other term is simply energy, right? It
Oh, it
is,
is.
we have, as humans, we have these emotions and we navigate the world using emotions. And just like any other mammal on the planet, we put off a frequency.
Yeah.
And most of our connection is below the waterline of that iceberg. It's a frequency where we connect. And there was a study using the Spain scale, SPANE, in Germany, where they can actually measure the frequency coming off of humans through different emotions, anger, love, and through storytelling, and the highest frequency, as much as I think they cited 400 times higher than love in terms of the frequency of emotion, was authenticity. Yeah. And this the how you present your authentic self to the world, being true to what you hold in here, putting it out into the world. And when you're connected to that in this time of churn, it's a very brave thing. It's a very generous thing. And guess what? Stage fright is a biological necessity of that. It simply means that it matters. And what it's about is taking that energy that's kind of chewing you up and making you look like you don't trust yourself and putting it out there for them. And as you said, just focusing on how much you love them, taking care of them, and just do it one person at a time. And it doesn't matter. It could be a sales pitch, or it could be a keynote or a TED talk, or talking to your travel ball team in the dugout, right? It's all about your relationship to the story and your relationship to your people. And if you do those two things with authenticity, everything else will work itself out.
Absolutely. Totally agree. That's awesome. Okay. You have a book that you just alluded to that you're writing on storytelling. Talk about that for just a second, because I want to make sure we get people teased. Obviously, we want to have you back when it's time to launch it so we can talk about it specifically. But talk a little bit about what you're currently writing.
All right. So I'm pretty excited about this, Mike. And I think your audience will appreciate this because they've been such proponents of nobody's coming to save you. I think this is the first time I've talked about this publicly. But there is going to be a trilogy of the Nobody is Coming books, the leadership books. The first one, obviously, Nobody's Coming to Save You. The second one is a book on called The Generosity of Scars. It was pulled from two of the most popular chapters in the book, which was storytelling and struggle. And so it's all about repurposing our stories of struggle into stories that serve other people. And so the whole book is coming out in the late spring on that. And then the final book will be Leaving Tracks. And this is a book that should probably be a year and a half from now, about, again, there was a chapter on that in the book as well, about our legacy and meaning and purpose, and how we create legacy of purpose in this world. And I'm going to be co-writing that with my dad. So we're already working on that as well. So really excited about these books, because these next two books, I think they are the how of the human connection that I talk about in Nobody's Coming to Save You. They're the real tactical how of storytelling and meaning. And those two things are what we must have to influence, teach, inspire, and lead.
I love it. I can't wait to read it. And I can't wait to have you back on to promote it. So let's talk about your play. You have a play that you're working on that's a one-man play, and it's brilliant. Talk about this for a second.
As I hear you talk about this, I'm just getting exhausted. And I'm understanding why my wife is so frustrated with me. Monty gets so frustrated with me.
By the way, Monty is amazing, just so we're clear. Okay.
She is.
She is absolutely what makes this thing work.
There's no doubt about it, man. I as my friend told me one time, he said, "You didn't marry up, you married out of your species." And I did. Like, for example, I'm in this beautiful little cabin in the middle of horse country in Kentucky, because I've been, working with my dad and caregiving with him at the hospital. And Monty knows I've got a deadline for this book, and she could, without me even saying anything, she booked this cabin, got it proximity to the hospital. And she's like, "When you are not at the hospital, you will be in this cabin writing." And it pulled us apart for a time period, but she understands what's got to be done. And she's done that for 30 years, including during the war. And I'm just in awe of her, to be honest with you. The play, Last Out, Elegy of a Green Beret is the first play I ever wrote. I performed the play with a group of veteran actors. I'm no longer in the play now. It's a new cast. They're killing it. They are touring right now. If you go to lastoutplay.com or taskforcepineapple.org, maybe you can, I don't know if to put it in your show notes, but it's touring. It's going to be in Leesburg in July. It's got several more tour stops. And then I think it'll tour again in 2026. Well, I love theater. I think theatrical storytelling is so powerful because it demonstrates what's possible. And for me, it is an outlet that I just can't describe, way more so than writing. Oral storytelling, theatrical storytelling of lived experiences is just it's my favorite thing to do. And so I've been working on an adaptation of Operation Pineapple Express. I look at what's going on in the country today. I look at what has happened with our Afghan allies, the emergence of the Taliban, and I just feel like, for me, the best way that I can be a part of that discussion in a meaningful way is through art, is through the theatrical representation of the book, Operation Pineapple Express. So since Thanksgiving, I've been writing quietly, and I've adapted it into a script, and I will be performing it as a one-person play starting on Veterans Day of 2025, and then it will tour the country in 2026. So if you liked Pineapple Express, I'm going to be telling it kind of Mark Twain style from the stage. I think there's something like 20 characters in it. It's a 2-act play, very hard hitting, will be followed by a talk back. And it'll just be Monty and me and a stage manager traveling the country, putting this play on. So it's in the developmental phase now. Mike, I've invited you to come to some of the readings that we're going to be doing this summer. I'm really happy with it. I'm really excited about it. And I'll be going full bore into rehearsals probably around July or August of this year. And then we're going to be in it.
Wow, that's so cool, dude. I'm so proud of you. I mean, I'm for a lot of things, but this is really one of the coolest things you're doing. Okay. I want to just real quick, 2 things. Number one, full disclosure, how we met was I purchased your audiobook, Operation Pineapple Express. I heard about it on Fox News and I listened to it. And then I reached out to you and told you how awesome it was. And I'd love to have you on the podcast to talk about it. And you responded right away, came on, and you had a new book coming out called Nobody's Coming to Save You, right? So we had an opportunity to talk about that and Operation Pineapple Express together at the same time. Very quickly, I'd like for you, because we talked about the play real quick, I'd love for you to tell the story, since we're storytellers, right? Of when you're out and you're handing out, this is regarding Last Out. You're out, you're handing out flyers, and Monty's with you, and it's hot and it's humid, which it can be in Tampa, and you're out on the street handing out flyers, and she turns in a moment of frustration and says, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Tell that story.
Yeah. It had been I appreciate you bringing that up. The birthing of this play was a journey in itself. I tell people that when you write stories, when you're generous with your scars, when you repurpose your struggles into stories that serve others, trauma, grief, anxiety, loss, there's gold in that, but there's also it is its own hero's journey. You go through your own reluctance, refusal, struggle, pain, belly of the whale as you're putting that story into the world. I know you know that. And this, for Monty and me, as I was writing the play, she didn't really understand it at first. We had, as a lot of military couples do from the war, we had each buried our own memories and experiences in the war so that we could move forward as a couple. There were things that she went through that she didn't talk about to me because she didn't want them on my mind and it might get me killed in combat. And there were things that I went through that I would never want to share with my wife because they were so horrific and caustic examples of combat. So we buried them. As I started to write the play, guess what? Those things started to surface. And what I thought was going to be a one-man play about a Green Beret sergeant named Danny Patton, who's based on 3 guys that I lost in combat, friends I lost, it became instead a play about Danny's wife, Danny's son. And I realized that I didn't know enough. And so Monty and me, I would ask her questions, and it really started to bring up stuff that she had selectively buried. At some point, we're pouring our money into this play. We're broke. And she's like, and she just, I don't understand it. Why are we doing this effing play? And I said, because I'm going to die if I don't. I didn't know what else to say because I truly felt that way. It was that important that I got this story into the world. And she kind of sat there for a second and she goes, well, I guess we have a play to do then. And from that point on, she became my partner in the play. And we moved through all of those uncomfortable conversations. And now so if it is its hero's journey, and every hero's journey on the other side of the struggle is resolution, is, the hero returns with a gift for the people. And by hero in this sense, I mean the protagonist. Now, Monty and I, when we go to the play, we have couples that we've known for years will come up to us and they'll both be in tears. And they, years in the military, one deployed, one taking care of their family. And they'll say, that was our life up there. And we're going to have a very different conversation on the way home tonight. Thank you. And Monty and I, we just kind of look at each other and we go, yeah, that was worth it.
This is an evolution for people, it really is.
And it's not unique to military. It's not unique to Monty and me. It is the return on investment, the return on leadership for being a storyteller. If you are generous with your scars, if you are willing to repurpose your struggle in the service of other people, many of whom you'll never even meet, but some you will. And they'll come just at that moment when, like Monty did, why are we even doing this? You're met with this reciprocity, this impact that your story had, and it clarifies it very quickly. It is, in my opinion, the most important thing we can do as parents, coaches, business owners, nonprofit leaders, is to become the absolute best storytellers that we can.
Yeah, totally agree. 1000%. Thanks for telling that. I appreciate it. Okay. So let's talk about The Gathering Storm. Sarah and I talked about it briefly on our podcast interview. This is quite a work that you've put together, and you've done a ton of research. Talk about who you've talked to, who you've researched this with, where all of this has come from, and then let's get into the meat and potatoes of the book.
Yeah, it's a book I didn't want to write, if I'm being honest with you, Mike. I didn't want to write it. And first of all, I did not write it alone. That's why you won't find my name in anything but the forward. You won't find any of the authors' names in the book anywhere, because several of them are under threat from terror groups, and frankly, at this point, I just don't know how either administration will respond to this kind of warning. The levels of governmental overreach that I've seen, and I just don't feel comfortable, and neither did the contributors. So that's the first thing, is I did not write this book alone. It was my concept, my initiative. It is a Task Force Pineapple book. 100% of the proceeds go back into Pineapple. But I wrote this book, Mike, because after the Afghanistan collapse in 2021, a handful of veterans, military intelligence alumni, and even some civilians jumped into the fray and did our best to help our Afghan allies who were being abandoned institutionally. Commandos, special forces, military intelligence professionals. Many of these individuals were highly placed in the former Afghan government. Many of them were sources for three-letter agencies. And they were left to their own devices, and they were being systematically executed, tortured, disappeared. And I wasn't good with it. A lot of other groups, we stood up Task Force Pineapple and others to help with that. Now, fast forward several years later, that was something most of us didn't want to do. I'd been retired for 10 years. My clearance had expired, for God's sake. I have no interest in that. I'm a storyteller now. But now that we had helped get some of these folks over here, and we're still on the phone with folks over there, a network of veterans and intelligence professionals had emerged, and they had very, very good access and placement with sources and vetted Afghans who would normally be assets for three-letter agencies for intelligence, for human intelligence. 99% of those assets were abandoned by the U.S. government in 2021. A large number of them are now talking to veterans through these disparate channels on Signal, WhatsApp. And what started to emanate to me was a very concerning reality of the reemergence of not just Al Qaeda, but ISIS-K and over a dozen other global terror groups inside Afghanistan, the origin place of 9/11. And they were doing so with a vengeance. And our government, both the Biden administration, they weren't talking about it. And it was really concerning to me. And I was hearing from very well-placed, very vetted individuals myself that there were as many as 1,000 operatives of ISIS-K, the Taliban, deep cover in the United States, with a plot with Al Qaeda behind all of it to hit the homeland. I'd heard this from Masood's son, the leader of the resistance. I'd heard this from very high people in the NDS, the intel apparatus of the Afghan intel agencies. And so I felt compelled, as did a few other contributors, that we had to do something. What I'll end with is this book. I wrote it reluctantly because I felt like if the government was not going to step up and handle what is likely going to be an attack that looks more like October 7th than 9/11, where we live, work, and play, then I felt compelled to write something that shared these findings and these insights with leaders like yourself, with leaders at the community level, state and local, so that they could at least start a conversation around this gathering storm. And that was the intent of the book. We did that. We shared these findings with the new administration. I'm still not convinced that they're moving on it to the degree that they should, but it is out there. And this was our effort to get it out to individuals and community members. And I think we did that.
Well, I applaud you for doing it, obviously, and I admire you for doing it. I want to go back for just a second, if it's okay. Let's talk about the timeline for a second, okay? One of the things you talk about in the book, and I think this is a big, big part of this, is if you had the opportunity today to know that there were going to be jihadists flying planes into the World Trade Center tomorrow, what would you do, right? If you knew about it ahead of time, and you even mentioned in the book, there were sources that were telling our people that it was going to happen and nobody was listening. This hubris that's happening, right? And we're seeing it again. So it's like history's repeating itself kind of thing, right? And one of the things we always talk about with 9/11 is never forget. I think we've forgotten. I think there's a part of us that has become complacent, and we're almost daring something like this to happen. And it makes me nervous, right? So let's go back for just a second. You have 9/11, obviously. You have bin Laden. You have all this stuff that took place that people are aware of. The attacks happen. We then go to Afghanistan and we make promises to tens of thousands of Afghanis that help us over a 20-year-long war. Talk about that for a second. Talk about the Doha Accords and sort of how this timeline has come up to today.
Yeah, I mean, the first promise that we made was after 9/11, which was never again.
Yeah.
There was a whole generation of intelligence professionals and warfighters, myself included, who were rocked by the attacks of 9/11. I lost my Ranger buddy Cliff in the Pentagon that day, and it changed our life. We gave most of our adult life to a 20-year war because we promised never again. The 9/11 Commission looked at the findings and said, man, this was an intelligence failure of epic proportions.
Yeah.
This was a failure to cross communicate. This was a failure to listen to Ahmed Shah Massoud, the leader of the Northern Alliance, telling us this was coming. And so all of this was captured and integrated into two things: building an intelligence apparatus on the ground in Afghanistan of human intelligence assets that could prevent that from happening in the future, and a ground force capability of an Afghan partner force that could be the buffer, the antibody to violent extremism. And granted, both had their problems, but both were very viable. The intel apparatus in Afghanistan was very, very effective. And then the special operations capability of Afghan commandos, special forces, Qas Qatayhas, they did 95% of the fighting. And so Both of these were systematically abandoned in less than 72 hours. It was the largest wholesale abandonment of a partner force in modern history.
Yeah.
And we called it an airlift. It
Yeah.
was not an airlift, it was a wholesale abandonment. And in that abandonment, 99% of our human intelligence assets were left in the dust. 100% of the operational commando force was left. Over 30,000 commandos left with their gear to be co-opted. So I'll pause there, but so that's the timeline that led to all of this.
Well, here's what I want to talk about, because I don't think people know this. Okay. And this is the thing that's been sort of wearing on me, because I knew this interview was coming up and I wanted to make sure we talked about this. One of the things you talk about in our first interview, when we talked about Operation Pineapple Express, was what led up to the falling of Kabul and basically all of Afghanistan. Okay. You talked about the Doha Accords that happened during the first Trump administration, and an absolute, I think, massive mistake in an exclusion of a party. Talk about who was excluded from the Doha Accords and how that led to this sort of rapid decline of Afghanistan.
Yeah, this is an important part, is because any presidential administration that was involved with the Afghanistan war that's thumping their chest and said, we did it right, should be ashamed of themselves.
Yeah.
Every single administration from the Bush administration to current was woefully underwhelming in the prosecution of the Afghan war, and their leadership was nowhere near the caliber of many of the men and women who executed it in the trenches.
Yeah.
It was a political disaster. The Doha Agreement under the first Trump administration was engineered by a guy named Zal Khalilzad, one of the kind of token Afghan interlocutors, the graybeards that had come into the fray from the very beginning of the war with Ambassador Dobbins when we first went in. And Khalilzad, in my assessment, is a guy that is 1 foot in with the Taliban. Although he is an Afghan American, I believe that his interests are certainly slighted and not in favor of our national security. And he worked closely with the Trump administration to broker a deal in Doha that excluded the Afghan government completely. It excluded every aspect of the Afghan government and dealt directly with the Taliban. Ahmad Shah Massoud, the leader, or Ahmed Massoud, the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud. Ahmed Massoud is currently the leader of the National Resistance Front in Afghanistan. He told me to my face, the Doha Accord, the Doha Agreement was the single greatest factor in the collapse of Afghanistan. Now, be clear, the abandonment of our allies is squarely on the shoulders of the Biden administration. Yeah. They own that. But I think it is completely irresponsible, if we are truly going to apply intellectual honesty and rigor here, to dismiss the Doha Agreement and its contribution to the collapse in the country. And my problem with this, Mike, is that I am seeing such a level of division in the country along in-groups and out-groups that, it's all those people over there, that administration caused it. And I testified in Congress, and it was disgusting. No one just stood up and owned it and said, how about American institutional leadership failure here? Mm-hmm. How about a multi-administration failure that needs to be fixed? Not one leader has stood up and did that. And the reality is the Doha Agreement and President Trump's support of that agreement is strategically implicated in the collapse of Afghanistan. And to say otherwise, in my opinion, is intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. And I thank you for covering that, because I don't think it's something people cover. It was something, I'm pretty well read on things. I stay up on things, on purpose, right? And I was shocked, absolutely shocked, at the fact that the Afghan government wasn't included in the Doha Accords. They weren't even included in the negotiations. Oh. And what that does is that marginalizes the Afghan government and tells the world, and especially the Afghanis themselves, that we don't believe in the Afghan government, that
It was
they basically don't matter.
it was
And
the
so when it comes time to fight, right? When it comes time to fight, who's the Afghan army going to fight for? They're not going to fight for the government that doesn't matter, that the US is not going to support. How was it that the Afghan war happened? We brought resources. We left a ton of resources, right? We were the ones that brought everything to bear in terms of backing, right? In terms of money, in terms of capital, in terms of our treasure. Okay. The Afghanis themselves helped us to prosecute this war. You know that better than anybody. And we made promises to them that we didn't keep. What I
yeah.
feel like is important for people to understand is the rapidity of how Afghanistan fell. Was the army didn't have anything to fight for. They had a government, that the US government, who's the big cat in this thing. The US government basically said through their actions more than anything else, they don't matter. The Afghan government doesn't matter. So who are they fighting for? You
Yeah.
with me?
Yeah, I am. And it signaled immediately the beginning of the end. And it was, things started to fall apart very quickly. It was an irresponsible deal.
Yeah.
Right. And it was brokered by nefarious actors like Zal Khalilzad, and frankly, strategic leaders like President Trump and people of his inner circle who did not have a fundamental understanding of Afghan realities. Now, I certainly have no issue with discussing the merits of leaving Afghanistan and winding that conflict down. But you wind it down responsible. There's an old saying. My mom used to take my brother and me into these glass antique shops. There was a sign that says, "You break it, you buy it."
Mm-hmm.
And we went in there and we created an environment where how you exit matters.
Yeah.
And we did make explicit and implicit promises to allies, and we walked away from them in a way that if you did that to your friends in real life, you would be isolated and alone, which is kind of what we're doing now. And the other thing that I'm really worried about is now that so you had that Doha agreement, then you have the horrible withdrawal under the Biden administration, and then now you have like a wholesale change in immigration, which I understand the merits of some of it, and resecuring our borders, and there's a lot of problems that we got to fix. However, and I have articulated this to senior leaders in the Trump administration, and I will say it again: if you lump Afghan commandos and Afghan special forces and Afghan interpreters who are here into this wholesale exodus of immigrants and people that you're kicking out of the country, without engaging the war fighters and their families of this 20-year war, who are inextricably tied to these individuals, you are not only making a mistake, you are throwing fuel on the fire of a moral injury to our veteran population that will last well beyond your time. You are decimating what little shred of trust the veteran population from that war, over 800,000 veterans alone in the Afghan war, have in their government. And it is a mistake. I'm not saying that there aren't bad actors from the Afghan community, because there are. And many of them got over here during the airlift. Many of them have turned. I understand national security first, but it can't be done at the exclusion of our global war on terror veterans. There must be dialogue. There must be engagement. And there's not right now.
Yeah. And you were one of the very first people to bring this up, by the way. And you should be acknowledged for it, because when you and I had our first interview, one of the things we talked about specifically was how they're here and they're settling in, how they're doing, and the fact that we're not addressing what we need to be addressing, which is consulting with the global war on terror veterans, and connecting them with the Afghani nationals that have come here that helped us during the war. And we left 30,000 of them there. There's 30,000 plus there.
There are, and now many of them have been co-opted over there. They have been brought to, because if somebody's got a pistol to your 7-year-old child's head and they say, you have two choices. You can do what you're really good at with us, or I'm going to kill your kid.
Yeah.
I don't know many people that wouldn't do that, because that's a whole different conversation. And we can sit on our moral high ground all day long, but we did that. We created that situation. Now, granted, a lot of people say, well, they could have fought back like the Ukrainians did. And that's a fair statement, right? But many of them did, and many of them are. But the way in which we left them created such a sucking chest wound in the country that their ability to collectively resist was decimated. And we got to own that, and so I believe that now where we are, Mike, is this administration, I hope, will listen to the global war on terror veteran community, particularly those who have been very involved in the evacuation and resettlement of our allies, but also who are actively talking to assets who have insights, access, and placement on this gathering storm. I believe there is, and Sarah Adams is an example where she has been completely P&G'd in a lot of ways, outcast in the IC, in the intelligence community, because she is speaking things into the world that are very uncomfortable. But it goes back to 9/11. It goes back to a promise that we made, never again. And many of us feel that we would much rather speak truthfully into this and risk, the loss of friends, the loss of reputation, even perhaps even harm to ourselves, than watch another 9/11 happen on this.
No, and this is a big deal. Now, I want to talk about two things. Number one, the intel that's coming out of Afghanistan is coming to a lot of our global war on terror veterans because of their connection, right? Because of their relationship. Kind of like what you talk about, connect like your life depends on it, right? Talk about that for a second, and the fact that basically when we left Afghanistan, they shut the phone off. Talk about that, because I think a lot of people don't realize that happened. And then the second thing I wanted you to talk about is what's going on with the Taliban, and how the Taliban has basically reconstituted itself or rebranded itself, and how that basically is a huge lie.
Yeah. So starting with the connectivity that many global war on terror veterans have with, I think, useful information inside Afghanistan, is, remember, the way I would describe it is, metaphorically, think of Afghanistan as a big anthill. Okay. And this anthill was built over 20 years. And the anthill, the ants that are moving inside that anthill are doing human intelligence, and they are doing anti-Taliban, anti-terror operations. So think of it like an intelligence special operations host nation, partner nation anthill. Out of nowhere, a big boot kicks that anthill over and just scatters everything, right? And it's just chaos. It's just, you've seen an anthill when it's kicked over. It's just complete chaos. Some are grabbing the eggs, some are scurrying, looking for the threat. But at the end of the day, there is no coherent organization. That is exactly what happened on August 15th, 2021. The anthill was kicked over, and all of this spilled out onto the ground. When it happened, it was very clear to a lot of veterans, particularly those that had fought in the special operations community, the intelligence community, that there was no way these individuals were going to survive on their own. So they jumped into the fray of that anthill, picked up the phone, got on signal. And so it was a very disjointed, disorganized, but then became a self-organizing system, because that's what so many global war on terror veterans are good at. We would get dropped into these rural, austere, ambiguous environments. We would build the network from the bottom up, and then we would swarm on the problem. And we got good at it over 20 years. Well, that's exactly what they did when this anthill kicked over. Those phone calls, those 911 calls, many of them were never terminated. 2, 3, 4 years later, they're still paying for rent. Veterans are still paying for medical drops, for babies to be born with midwives, for visas. They are basically the lifeline. It's the world's longest 911 call. As my buddy Duke says, It's veterans trying to solve an Uncle Sam-sized problem with their pension funds.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're
But
529s. They're right. Yeah.
So to give you an example, to your point though, of like the fidelity, because people would say, well, why isn't the agency, the CIA, talking about this? Or, well, one, first of all of those assets were abandoned. So there was a complete breach of trust with these assets and their handlers. I'll give you one example. You've heard of Legend, right? The Afghan American former intelligence. He was a U.S. Army NCO intelligence operative. He maintained connections, much like many of us did, but he had even deeper connections because of his lineage there. And he went back over and he built relationships with senior leaders in what's called the NDS, which was the former CIA version. It was the former version of the CIA in Afghanistan, with the most senior leaders. And I mean the most senior leaders who would be partners in the 20-year war with the CIA director. One of these individuals was, during the abandonment, asked for a rifle to defend his family, was denied by the agency, right? His entire family was, or a large number of his family was killed. His brother was beheaded. The people in his family were tortured, looking for him. Nothing from the agency, nothing from the U.S. government. And this guy's connection to the agency and to the government goes all the way back to the resistance in the 70s of warning us then. The only American, this guy, now remember, in the war, his partner was like the agency director and the chief of base in Afghanistan. That's who he talked to. Now, the person he's talking to is Legend. The only American he's talked to is Legend and me, to some degree, but nothing like what he talks to Legend. So this guy's network is completely intact. It's a multi-decade network, right? He's got people inside the Taliban. He's got people inside Al-Qaeda, inside ISIS. He's got people everywhere. He can tell you serial numbers on the weapons that were left behind that are now in Gaza.
Oh, God.
Right? But that is one example, Mike. Multiply that times dozens of veterans who have similar relationships, right? And there is no harnessing of this by the federal government right now. It's like a ServPro commercial. It's like it never even happened. They've just swept it aside. So all of these formerly high-level relationships are now being managed by veterans on their cell phones and their laptops. So when you hear people like Sarah and others talking, I would at least give it credence, because it is not a bunch of veterans still wishing they were in the war. These are folks mainly who just want their lives back, but they feel a duty to warn, and that's what they're doing.
Well,
so that's question one. I'll pause there.
Okay. Well, the beautiful thing about Sarah is Sarah and Boone wrote that book, Benghazi. And to me, it was incredibly, I mean, probably not to you, but to me, it was incredibly enlightening. And anybody that gets a chance to read Benghazi, Know Thy Enemy, I mean, this thing is absolutely incredible in terms of what I call the jihadist family tree. It's so connected, it's insane. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. People don't realize that Hamas trained in Afghanistan in some of our old training camps. They don't realize what it was that precipitated October 7th. They don't understand how connected all this is. This is insidious. It really is crazy. When you start looking at it, it's something that we should pay attention to and people should know more about, I believe. So let's talk about this. Sorry, man. Let's talk about the second question. I apologize.
No, don't apologize, because it's refreshing, honestly, to hear you as a civilian leader talking about this, because I'll tell you, like, if you one thing I'll tell people about the Gathering Storm, if you get it, what you'll find in the first part is you'll find the intelligence summary from Sarah and a range of other analysts who are really good. The second part you'll find is a compilation of lessons learned that myself and some other lessons learned from the special ops community did around 8 or 9 localized complex terror attacks, all the way back to the DC sniper, and what we can learn from that. So, whether you buy into the level of reporting that's in there or not, I think there's at least enough fidelity to give you pause and to get you thinking about it. Now, what was the second question?
So we talked about how they shut off the phone, right? And
Yeah.
I lost the second question. I apologize. Geez. But specifically what we were talking about was leading up to the gathering storm. So we talked about how they shut the phone off, and you were talking about the three-letter agencies like CIA, that kind of thing, right? That they just didn't have anywhere to go. They had nowhere to go. And now all these global war on terror veterans are basically the source. They're the ones that are talking to what used to be our Afghani allies. They're still our allies, but they're embedded now, obviously there, right? And then the
Yeah.
other part that we were talking about specifically was now that this storm that's gathering has happened because the Taliban has rebranded itself. And I wanted you to talk about sort of that marketing ploy, because one of the things that's happening is the Doha Accords were between the U.S. government and the Taliban, excluding, like you mentioned, the Afghan government. The Taliban has taken on this role, right? And Sarah talks about it in her podcast interview with you, where they've taken on this role of supposedly they're the good guy, and they're getting $250 million. Is it a month or a week or some crazy thing from us for humanitarian aid? And then when there's attacks, they don't take credit for it. Somebody else does. I mean, it's an ISIS-K thing or whatever. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, there's a whole, to me, Sarah is much more adept on this than I am, and Legend as well. Legend would be a good guest on your podcast, by the
I'd
way.
love to have him. I'd love to have him.
But I will attempt to answer it at my level. And here's what I think it comes down to is does anybody really think that the Taliban is a responsible counterterror partner? Right. I mean,
that's what I'm trying to understand.
That's because, but that is exactly what's happening.
Well, we're negotiating with them like they are. You with me? Like we vetted them or something, and nobody vetted them.
No, or like they are a rational actor, and there's reporters in the New York Times. There's Zal Khalilzad, Cheryl Bernard, Zal's wife, saying that, Afghanistan is open for business. It's time for people to get back. And you have Afghan women saying you are outright lying. That is not true. People are being targeted and killed. You have a level of gender genocide that is beyond the pale. Gender apartheid. I mean, it is awful. And to say otherwise is irresponsible on a humanitarian level.
Yeah.
But just on a pragmatic, like I just ask people, just step back and really look at the fundamental views of the Taliban. Look at the relationship that they still have with Al Qaeda. Look at the intermarrying. And this isn't coming from Scott Mann. This is me talking to members of the resistance, talking to members who are still in Afghanistan, in former commandos, intelligence operatives, saying, look, they are married into them the same way that Soleimani's kids were married into Hezbollah, right? Yeah. It is a way to put, as Masood says, to put the roots of the tree in the ground so that they can weather the storm, and so there is, in fact, evidence of intermarriage and relationships between Taliban and Al Qaeda. Now, what is also being called out, and I'm probably lesser qualified to speak to it, is this idea. Some would assert, probably Sarah, that it's not an idea, it's a fact, that ISIS-K is the surrogate for this action, for this activity. They are the fall guy. They are the tactical executor of attacks like you saw in Russia, like you will likely see in the United States. And Al Qaeda is the wizard behind the veil. And the Taliban, they're not sure what happened. They're targeting ISIS as a result of this, but they're actually not even really targeting ISIS.
Supposedly.
It's a lot of analysts believe that we've been duped, that this is a massive facade, and we're being taken to the cleaners on it. We are indeed still funding the Taliban. There's still money going to them. From what I can tell, Congressman Tim Burchett is hot on this one. Legend is hot on this one. Pallets of cash have been going to the Taliban for years, going right to the Haqqani network. Haqqani, the father of suicide bombing in Afghanistan, is now being treated as a head of state, as a rational actor, as a man who can travel with no longer a $25 million bounty on his head. And in my gut, I just feel like, based on what I've heard from people on the ground there and my own analysis, there's no way in hell that these actors have flipped over a new leaf any more than the leader of Syria has turned a new leaf and is no longer an Al-Qaeda operative. They are simply practicing, I think it's called takfiri, the chameleon-like approach of making oneself be what one needs to be to navigate sticky wickets and then strike again. It is timeless. It is just astounding to me, honestly, that we're falling for this. And I challenge the IC. I challenge institutional leaders, bring these GWAT veterans into DC and actually let them lay out what they have. You lay out what you have and really hear them, really listen to them. And then if it's off base, it's not true, fine. But until that's done, I think we are heading down. We're heading to a gathering storm.
So IC, for people that don't know, IC is intelligence community. GWAT is global war on terror community. Okay. Just for people that are tuning in and haven't heard that. Now, one of the things you mentioned, marriage, a couple of times, and I want to talk about this. Let's talk about relationships specifically, right? Because there's somebody in particular of note who is the head of Al-Qaeda, who's married to somebody of note, who was the daughter of the former head of the Taliban. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah. So another major sticking point between the global war on terror community, particularly the intelligence alumni analysts, and the intelligence community, is whether or not the bin Laden kids, particularly Hamza bin Laden, are alive. We assert in this book, and the analysts that I typically work with assert that he is indeed alive. He was not killed in an airstrike in Ghazni, as the first Trump administration thought. He is alive. He is at the helm of Al-Qaeda. He is leading it with a proficiency and adeptness that surpasses his father. He is bent on avenging not just his father, but the 20-year impacts of that war on Afghans and the communities. And he intends to bring a version of that to our cities and our communities where we live, work, and play. He is much smarter than in terms of his the way he navigates, and so he's not in the public eye. But there is a strong opinion that he's alive in the global war on terror veteran community. There is an equally strong position that he is dead in the intelligence community. End of discussion. He was killed in the airstrike. There's nothing to see here, and they won't even entertain it. So as a result of that, you have potentially a leader of Al-Qaeda operating untargeted, right? Unless there's some level of targeting or acknowledgement that is not publicly noted, which I don't think is true or the case. So it's a major discrepancy, Mike. And again, there's the eye rolls. Oh, it's the veterans again saying that he's alive. It's conspiracy theory. And they take Sarah, myself, and others, and they roll us out to be, kind of nut jobs. And the reality is, like, look, man, I have no interest in this shit at all. I let my clearance expire. I want my life back. I wrote this book and made a public declaration on my podcast that I wasn't going to talk about this anymore. In fact, you're the first person I've talked about this since then. So, most of us don't even want to be in this space, but we feel a duty to warn, a duty to report. I fought this war for a long time, man. And I like to think I was a pretty good Green Beret. I was asked to do some pretty senior strategic things, as was Sarah, as were others involved in this. Why would you just dismiss us out of hand? Like, why would you, particularly considering the way we were brought into this with the withdrawal and the kicking over of the anthill and stepping in to hold the line when the government didn't? I mean, why wouldn't you be a bit more
Curious,
right? A bit more inclined to hear more? I would think after 9/11 and the 9/11 Commission and all that happened with that we would be like, okay, let's step back and let's really lay this out. And this is what I talk about in the Gathering Storm is, if we're going to get in front of this thing, and I don't know that we can, there needs to be a multi-echelon collaborative effort from federal to state to local to community to citizen that is unprecedented, a private-public partnership that is unlike anything we've ever seen. And right now, I see a complete dismissal by the federal government of the global war on terror generation. And in fact, a dismissal to the point that it's like it never even happened, and that it was a bit of an embarrassment, and that this is how it's going to go now. The Taliban's a good partner. We'll work with them. The leaders of Syria are good partners, and it's uninformed and it's dangerous.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's a lie. It's a giant lie. Okay. So the head of Al-Qaeda, so Osama bin Laden's son is married to.
Oh, sorry. There's several marriages that are of note there. He is married, if I remember you check me on this, but I know Sarah, I believe, has alluded, as have other analysts, that he's married to Zawahiri's daughter, as well as
Mullah Omar.
Yeah,
Mullah Omar, right?
And Haqqani.
Yeah.
So all of those individuals are wed through their bloodlines into the bin Laden family. And the bin Laden brand is back. And the bin Laden brand is intermarried into the Haqqanis, right? And into the Omar family. And so that really entrenches the Taliban Al-Qaeda nexus at a level that is very alarming.
So one of the things that Sarah and I talked about in particular, and I don't want to get off subject. This is literally, I promise you, we're going to the Gathering Storm. One of the things we talked about in our podcast interview was Dark 30, Zero Dark 30. And we talked specifically about this character in the movie, Mia, who basically would not give up, would not listen to no's, would not take no for an answer, the whole thing, right? There's a scene in the movie where she's sitting in the conference room with Leon Panetta at the head of the table, and they're going around and asking percentages, 60, 50, all these different percentages. And she's over, nobody asked her, she's over in the corner, and she says 100% without anybody asking her what her percentage is. Okay. I feel like that type of tenacity, that type of focus, that type of drive is the kind of thing that we need today. And specifically, when we were talking about her and we were talking about how she wouldn't give up, we really need to start thinking about the will that we're bringing to this potential conflict. When 9/11 hit, everybody coalesced, everybody came together, everybody, we had patriotism, we had all this other stuff, right? We had energy. We don't have that now. We don't have that when it comes to this potential threat. And I feel like we need it. I feel like it's something that's incredibly important. Will you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, that's one of the things I hit towards the end of the book when I talk to the community aspect of it, is that, throughout American history, what has allowed us to overcome hurricanes, earthquakes, mass shootings, 9/11 has always been community. Community at the heart of American existence, and human connection is at the heart of community. And I go back to the churn. We're more divided, disconnected, disengaged than we've ever been. Our very leaders at institutional levels, both Democrat and Republican, are dividing us. They are applying a divisionist mindset of leadership. And I define divisionism as a working definition of basically when you foment instability within a population to create in-groups and out-groups that advance your agenda. Right? That is divisionism. And you don't have to look far to see it. You see it on X. You see it on LinkedIn. You see now you start to see the loose talk of war. You see talk of insurrection. And I can tell you, as a former Green Beret who spent a lot of time around insurrections and civil wars in other countries, when you start introducing that into your daily language, you had better be very careful.
Yeah.
Because that is something you do not come back from. Taking your daughter to school or your mother to a doctor's appointment now becomes a life or death endeavor. There is no rule of law. There are only in groups and out groups and factions and checkpoints and atrocities that happen in civil war and insurrection that do not happen in a society of abundance, of rule of law that we have in this country right now. So the first thing that I say to people as citizens, regardless of your party, is take a step back and look at what we have here in this country. It's very special. Yeah. It's very special. And a lot of Americans died for it. And a lot of Americans got scuffed up for it. And a lot of veterans right now are asking themselves, what the hell did I even do this for?
Yeah.
What did I even do this for? There is such a dismissal of their service. There is a dismissal of their allies. And now we are, as Sebastian Junger says, treating each other with a contempt, our neighbors with a contempt normally reserved for one's enemies. And listen, I'm not talking, I know there are nefarious actors here. I even talk about this in the book, and they are fueling this. But if we as leaders, Mike, at community, state, local, law enforcement, federal, if we can't discern bad actors from a different political party or a different point of view, it's already lost. Yeah. We've already lost. Now, we have not yet. We can discern this and we can navigate this, but I'm really adamant about this because right now, I am more concerned about how we are treating each other as citizens and how we are dividing each other in ways that it's almost like we're doing their work for them. Yeah. We're creating the conditions that will make it very easy to do an October 7th. And I just hope that our institutional leaders set their hubris aside and step back from this and, kind of apply a Madisonian approach and level down, man, level the rhetoric, stop the dadgum name calling on X. I mean, give me a break.
Yeah. I totally agree.
It's Bush League.
It is.
And what it does is it elicits an emotional temperature of a sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze. It foments divisionism, in-group, out-group behavior. So within that, we've also got to surgically, I do think there are people that have to be removed from this country. I do think our borders have to be locked down. I do think there are going to have to, unfortunately, be raids, surgical raids on bad actors. They are here. But if we can't do that within the context of a civil society and take care of each other while we do it, we have a much bigger problem on our hands.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Al-Qaeda's focus, which is kind of scary. We're also going to talk about what we can do from the gathering storm, what we can do to prepare and to get ready for something that we believe is an impending deal. We'll be right back. Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com, and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go there today. We're back with Scott Mann, and we're talking about the gathering storm. In particular, we're talking about this. The gathering storm is an impending attack on the U.S. And we believe from what we've heard that the actors are here. They've reconstituted. They're ready to go. There's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000. They're projecting 60,000 losses, and it's going to make 9/11 look like a kindergarten birthday party. The thing about it is Al-Qaeda is focused. Talk about this for just a second because it's scary. They literally focus every minute of every day on retribution. They want payback for Osama bin Laden being killed. Talk about that for a second.
Yeah, a lot of the analysts that I've spoken with, the intelligence alumni and folks who are still talking to well-placed Afghans inside the country are saying that Hamza bin Laden and the leadership of Al Qaeda, they learned a lot. For example, when I was in Vienna with Sean Ryan, I sat down with Ahmed Massoud, the son of Ahmed Shah Massoud, and we talked about Al Qaeda today.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he said to me, I'll never forget it. He was very direct with me. And he said, you know, Al Qaeda learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
20-year war. The Taliban learned a lot. You will not see them at the forefront of things. You will see them probably not at all. They are going to be by, with, and through. They're going to be in the shadows. And he even referenced Pakistan. He goes, if you look at Pakistan, Tariq-i-Taliban and other surrogate groups are at the forefront of that, but you can bet that Al Qaeda is behind it. They've learned. And he said ISIS will probably be, a front that we will deal with in America. But he made it very clear, as have others, that Al Qaeda is still very much in control. They are at the helm. They are they're as committed or more committed than ever. That's right. The puppet master's pulling the strings. But they're going to do it differently. And what got us here is not going to get us there. Yeah. And so what we're looking for in terms of patterns is probably dated, and their playbook has changed. Now, as far as the vengeance piece, I've seen multiple sources of reporting that say that Hamza bin Laden is adamant about retribution for the 24. And look, he's not alone in that. If you believe he's not alive, fine. I mean, there are a range of senior leaders who want retribution for what they believe was 20 years of decimation in Afghanistan at local levels. And there was a lot of decimation at local levels. That there, in Pashtun society, for example, vengeance is honor code is a very real thing, just like it is with my family in Appalachia, but this is times 100. And if you think that these terror groups are not simmering for payback, and the way I've seen it articulated to me is this isn't the spectacular attacks of 9/11 on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, which were horrific. This is a much more, if that was terrorism, this is what my buddy Dave at the agency calls horrorism. This is the application of horrific attacks at an interpersonal level where we live, work, and play. They want to bring it home so the citizens felt what the Afghan and Iraqi citizens felt. They want to bring it home. They want the families to suffer. They want the veterans' families to suffer. They want to find the veterans. It's a very personal thing. And this is why from an assumption, a planning assumption, this makes sense to me. This makes sense to me, knowing the enemy the way I know them. That makes total sense. I mean, just off assumption and an open border for 4 years. Yeah, I think, that is a much more, especially as I look at October 7 and the way that went down, this is a much more likely attack where we live, work, and play, that Al Qaeda would be 3 levels back, and you would see ISIS and other surrogates at the forefront of that. It's right in their MO. It gives the Taliban and Al Qaeda plausible deniability while continuing to take sacks full of cash from us. Why wouldn't they do that? I mean, that's the part that just baffles me, is that we take Haqqani and the Taliban at their word that they are targeting ISIS and that they are now somehow pragmatically on our side. I mean, who the hell would even believe that on a good day? So, I think that's the way it's shaping up. And I think that the smart play then is, again, towards the back of the gathering storm, is even if you don't buy into the intel analysis, right? If you dismiss Hamza's alive, dismiss 1,000 operatives. Hell, it was 19 for 9/11. Yeah. It was 10 for Mumbai. They locked down a city of 19 million. Do you subscribe to that number? And if so, you might want to take a look at the case studies and see this has been trending and going down over the last 20 years. It is glaringly obvious that localized, complex attacks where we live, work, and play are the trend. And we are not ready. I have talked to scores, Mike, of law enforcement, first responders, state and local legislators. I can't tell you how many Joint Terrorism Task Force members who are active call me behind the scenes and say, dude, keep going. We're not ready. Yeah. I know what you're hearing. We're not ready. Keep going. Don't stop. So, it's really alarming.
So I want to drive something home, and I'm sorry that I'm sort of on this and I won't get off of it, but there is and you've described it a couple of times, and it's bone chilling when you do it. And by the way, Legend talked about it. Sarah talked about it. There is an intensity. There's a mania. They're maniacal in their intensity to deliver the kill shot here. And I want to make sure people understand how unbelievably motivated these people are. You have looked them in the eye. You've dealt with them. You were in amongst them. That's what Green Berets do, right? Green Berets are in behind enemy lines, helping the indigenous people defend themselves and fight. You defended, we talked about rooftop leadership. You were on the rooftop with your guys defending against Al-Qaeda all night, right? When they would attack the village you were in. You've seen the intensity in these people's eyes. You've seen what drives them. Can you talk about that for a second, just so people understand the level that we're talking about?
Like a lot of veterans of that war, I have been exposed to the local realities of not just the individuals that fought against us and continue to fight against us, but their ideology and the way that ideology manifests in their physicality. I've seen it in the interrogation rooms. I've seen it on the battlefield. Like a lot of, I'm not unique in that, in the sense that there's been a lot of people who have seen that. However, that has impressed upon me, and just in my study and practice of dealing with them, and a lot of years in working with intelligence analysts on that, just a fundamental appreciation for a multi-century narrative that they have to reestablish a global caliphate. And I think it is deluded for any of us to think that that is going to change because an administration changes, or you drop a Moab bomb on them, or you take their numbers down to whatever. You're simply mowing the grass. The ideology that fuels the flame runs deeper than an aquifer in Florida. It is blood memory, and it fuels them. And until that is systemically addressed, it will always be that driving narrative that causes them to smile at you when they, and again, this is not, in my assessment, this is not the Islamic population. This is not the Ummah. This is a fringe derivative of Islam that I believe are Islamists and have a radical antisocial view of the world, that a global caliphate is the only answer. It cannot coexist with anything, and they will go to any length to ensure that there is no rival to their caliphate. And they will, and that to any length, they will kill children. They will harvest organs and sell them on the black market for weapons. That there is no off limits for the establishment of this global caliphate. And they will stop at nothing to do that. To think that because the administration has changed, or you do a deal with a certain guy that wears a suit, it's diluted. And I expect that of politicians of both parties. Honestly, I do, because their hubris is frankly irreconcilable. It is very disappointing when I see members of the intelligence community and the special operations community at senior levels buying into it as well, and not throwing their stars on the table and saying, I can't be part of this. This is going to get Americans killed. So that's just kind of how I see that, man. I mean, that they will stop at nothing. And if you want to see what that looks like, again, read the case studies in here. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Watch my interview with Doron Kaidar, who was Israeli Special Forces.
Yeah.
Watch that interview and watch him talk about coming up on the Nova Music Festival,
Mm-hmm.
October 7th, and what happened to those babies in many of these bordering communities with the frontier in Gaza. That is exactly what is possible and likely in a localized complex attack. And again, look at the Beslan school siege,
Mm-hmm.
where children were corralled by Chechen Islamists and put in the middle of the gym with explosives hanging from the rims of the basketball goals. And they were made to sit there for so long that they were drinking their own urine, dehumanized to a point, children. And then ultimately, most of them killed in the explosion. Every single one of these attacks has some level of close interpersonal horrorism like that. And this is unfortunate, man. I hate it. I wish we weren't talking about it, but it is the reality of this threat and this enemy. And they will absolutely visit this at a close interpersonal level if given the choice.
It's a brutality that's otherworldly. I mean, it's just, it's hard for people to fathom. It's hard for them to grasp. Now, for people that are not people, go ahead.
Let me just say this, Mike, if I could. I just want to say this one part because this is important, and I talk about this in the book. It's not just horrorism for the sake of horrorism, although that does have a shock value that is amplified strategically with their body cams that they wear and that kind of thing. It is also functional in that it creates systemic paralysis within the state.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can, for example, like they did in Israel, run at the IDF, Israeli Defense Force substations, attack them, kill the local law enforcement or first responders right out of the gate. If you can create a level of shock at a music festival that is so horrific that it paralyzes first responders, they can't get there. Look at the, it's not terrorism, but look at Western North Carolina during the hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
Look at, and I talk about this in the book, look at how that overwhelming violent nature act created systemic paralysis from federal to state levels. Pastor Glenda told me when we toured the area, she's like, we hadn't seen members of the government, federal to state to local, in 14 days. Yeah. And had veterans not come in when they did, we would have probably run out of medicine and run out of water. The point here is, it's not just horrorism for the sake of horrorism. There is a functionality to it, and it is systemic paralysis. If they can paralyze our institutional response, they can hold ground. Mm-hmm. They can hold terrain. They can do a number of things that have second and third order effects. And so it's not just mass casualty. It is a systemic paralysis that then causes one to lose faith in one's institutions. Enter the global caliphate. It is so fundamental to how they operate, and likely in terms of just assumptions that it strikes me that not more people are talking about it.
Now we're in 64 countries worldwide, which is hard for me to fathom, but there may be people that don't know what caliphate means. Can you talk about that for just a second?
It's a governing body of Sharia law, of Islamic
taking over.
Sharia law.
Just taking over completely. Yeah.
There's no separation of church and state. It's not secular. It is the rule of God, the rule of Islam. It is Sharia. Honor killings, stoning, it is not conducive to a liberal democracy. How about that?
I got you. Okay.
Now,
so
can they coexist? I think any religion can coexist, but their version of the caliphate is not possible to coexist with a liberal democracy.
So for people that are not familiar with October 7th and what all happened on October 7th, can we talk about that for just a second? Because one of the things that you talk about in the book is it really is a dress rehearsal.
A lot of analysts do feel that the October 7 attacks in Israel by Hamas and other operatives, it's been asserted that there were Taliban mixed in there and Al-Qaeda and others, ISIS, that there were weapons U.S. made weapons from Afghanistan were involved. Even training is asserted that it took place in Afghanistan prior. There's been disputes of that. So it's, it's one of these things between the veterans and the institutional IC that they dispute that. But regardless, it was an unprecedented attack, a local complex attack, not just on installations, but on communities, schools, the Nova Music Festival, and the idea being to, Duran told me that he was an IDF Special Forces soldier, that the idea was to even, to move to the Temple on the Mount, and seize that, and then to mobilize second and third order responses of Palestinians inside Israel to hold terrain. So there was a larger objective here to hold terrain. It wasn't just mass casualties. And October 7 was indeed the day that hostilities commenced in Afghanistan following 9/11, where the coalition forces started targeting openly the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Many believe that, and I don't doubt it either, that October 7, while it was a decisive strike on what they deemed the near Satan, it was also a dress rehearsal to flesh out what they will do in a similar fashion when given the chance in the United States. Duran also agrees with this and asserted that they've certainly learned from this as well. There were a lot of lessons learned that the bad guys took from this. But I think October 7 provides us as citizens, as community leaders, with best practices and lessons learned of the horror that they went through. Some of them, like Duran, have been very generous and they're willing to share and talk about it. I think we need to do more to not just reach out to our friends in Israel who endured this, but also to learn from them, because they have something to say. But there's also, Mike, there's a lot of other case studies. I think Mumbai, which happened, I can't remember what year that was. I want to say it might have been 06, but it was 10 specially trained and selected LET members, Lashkar-e-Taiba, who were surrogates of Al-Qaeda. This was part of bin Laden's plan. They went in and they basically came in from the water. They conducted complex attacks on hotels, theaters, restaurants, mass casualties in the hundreds, held terrain for 10 days, and locked down a city of 19 million. 10 selected, well-trained individuals. Multiply that times 10. Yeah. What does that look like across 10 cities in the United States, right? Yeah. So there are a number of case studies out there, not just October 7, and they're in this book. And it goes deep enough that I think gets the reader thinking about it. And then you can do your own research and dive in deeper. But I encourage, communities, law enforcement to work together. I talk to SWAT teams and say, look, just do scenario-based training. Like, just take one thing that the LET did in Mumbai, their tactics, and build it into your training scenarios. Why wouldn't we do that instead of just focusing on a single active shooter like most law enforcement do today?
Yeah, just be prepared more than anything else, right? So talk for just a second about some details about October 7th. Is it true that they attacked? So Duran was on your podcast, the Scott Mann podcast, and he was talking about the fact that they were briefed the day before. Correct? Am I remembering this correctly? They were briefed the day before that this potentially was coming, and they just kind of said, no, that couldn't happen.
I interviewed a lot of people. It is accurate. I interviewed a lot of people around October 7 and intelligence analysts, IDF, special forces, law enforcement, civilians, Americans who were working in Israel or who have family in Israel, and all of them overwhelmingly said that there was evidence and indicators of this attack, whether it was footage of Hamas cutting the fence, breaching operations, even footage of glider operations. There were reports coming in of this going to happen, and there was a universal dismissal of this at federal, state, local levels, even a dismissal of this within the communities that were in the bordering region, where I had people tell me anonymously, because they have, they're much more postured for this at a community level. They're on a war footing.
They have bomb shelters, the whole thing.
They also have community quick reaction forces that are
Yeah.
citizens that are trained. They have a pool of weapons that are kept in a secure location, and they can go and get them and be a response force. It was told to me by several constituents that weapons were missing prior to the attack, that there were Palestinians who were spotting and assessing and reporting and demonstrating very curious behavior leading up to it. And again, the general consensus was no way they could pull this off. No way that they're up to this. No way that they have the capacity for this. All from the IDF senior leadership all the way down to people living in these communities. And this is probably my biggest message. And this isn't my message. This is a message, Mike, I interviewed, I can't tell you how many people I interviewed for this book who were either first responders or were involved or were victims of these different attacks. And they all said the same thing: hubris. Like if they were going to look back and allocate a cause or something that they would do differently, it was hubris, this institutional arrogance, this deeply embedded arrogance that this couldn't happen to us. There's no way they're capable of this. And just look at how veterans are being treated and how Sarah's being treated as she tries to make this case. Absolute unconscionable hubris by leaders who think that they've got it. They think that they've got it figured out, and it won't happen on their watch. And history, modern recent history, is replete with this kind of hubris. And guess what? When it does happen, you won't see those cat daddies anywhere. Yeah. They'll scurry into the little corners, the dark corners, and they'll go silent.
Yeah.
Or they'll trot out a congressional inquiry with a bunch of harunks on how did this happen, right? 9/11 Commission too. And what a shame that would be to me. What a slap in the face to the veteran population, but more importantly, what a devastating blow to our people who, after 9/11, we should not face this again in this country for a long time. But our institutional hubris has already eclipsed our institutional memory.
Yeah. So this is the definition, textbook definition of evil. And I want to ask you something that I think I remember from your episode with Duran. Did Hamas attack IDF locations and police stations and then don their uniforms?
They did attack, frontal assault on security nodes right out of the gate with complete audacity. And there were also numerous incidents of them already wearing IDF uniforms, to the point of Duran told me that in some cases, I think it was Duran, I'll have to double check it, but I know it was a firsthand witness of these individuals dressed in IDF uniforms in the homes of the families in these communities.
They let them in, right? They let them in because they were dressed in the uniform.
And calming the children down and then shooting their parents in front of them or torturing them in front of them, killing them in front of the children so that the children would have, and then leaving the children alive so that they would have enduring memories of IDF responders as evil.
It's just, people need to think about that happening here.
Yes.
That potentially could happen here.
And I don't want to, it's when I do this, it's often met with just resistance and even hostility. And I get it. Like, it is such an uncomfortable thing. But if we think that, and that's why a lot of times when there's the talk of Russia and China, I do readily admit that those are threats and very viable threats. However, if you ask me what is the most dangerous threat to our country right now, one, I would say it is our own divisionism. That's the biggest threat. The second threat are Islamist violent extremists who are already in this country poised to strike at an October 7 style level, because they, state actors like Russia, China, I do believe that they will act in their best interest, and they need both will and capacity to hit us. And while they have capacity, I don't know that they have the will for an overt attack on the United States at this point. They could, and they're trying. But ISIS, they don't care. They have both the will and the capacity to strike. And that's what I always look at when I assess a threat: will and capacity. And when you lay ISIS-K up against China, Russia, and their propensity to hit us where we live, work, and play based on will and capacity, which one registers the highest?
Yeah.
It's not even a competition.
Okay, so I want to talk in a minute about what people can do on the ground now, what they can do to prepare. But before we do that, I want to talk about something that I'm probably going to get the term incorrect. I'm not a veteran. I do have a short haircut, but I'm not a veteran. That I'm a big supporter of the military. There's a thing, I think it's called recon, where somebody goes out ahead of time and they engage forces, and they then do it so that the rest of the unit, the rest of the force knows what sort of reaction time they have. They know who they're going to send. What's that called?
Well, there's different, it's recce, close recce or reconnaissance or recon. Typically, the best recon is where you don't get compromised.
Right.
You can go and observe. And then there are other techniques that are not necessarily reconnaissance. Reconnaissance is basically being able to get out and put eyes on, either human eyes or some other form, satellites, map images, but some kind of reconnaissance that gives you a sense of what your target is before you hit it, right?
Right.
But then there's also ways to test responses, and that's not necessarily reconnaissance. This is a shaping operation where you can test how responses happen and then factor that into your planning and your
execution. You're poking the bear, right? And you're seeing what sort of response you're getting.
Maybe not even poking the bear. I mean, for example, it might be observing, just passive observing what's happening in the country right now.
Yeah.
Like what's happening in LA. Just passive observance, right? How is this actually going down? Because what you're getting is a good collective rendering of the kind of chaos and panic that you'd like to see. How are people responding to that, right? How are Palestinian and Hamas sympathizer groups responding to protests on college campuses? That's passive observation. Wildfires, the wildfires that happened out in California.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There is in one of the ISIS magazine, it's called Inspire. It's this glossy magazine that ISIS puts out to homegrown insurgents. There's a whole series on wildland fire and how you can use arson to create fire and so violence and disruption inside the country. That hurricanes in Western North Carolina, all of these present opportunities for bad actors to observe, orient, decide, and act differently. And if we think that's not happening, we're deluded. Again, I go back to the entire article on wildland fire from the fires in Australia that were written as a how-to magazine to create drip torches in America.
Talk about, in your book, The Gathering Storm, you talk about New Orleans. You talk about New Year's Eve. Talk about that for a second. What is it that we believe that was?
I haven't been in it in a while, Mike. I know the last time I was kind of in it, I have talked to New Orleans law enforcement anonymously off the record because they will get fired if they, there were at least one member of New Orleans law enforcement who had reached out to me on the Gathering Storm conversations before the attack, asking for training. They hit their local government up on it and were denied. From what I understand is this individual was radicalized and was affiliated with ISIS in that sense. It was ISIS inspired and was trained in, to some degree, not just in, the ramming. There's been entire tactics, techniques, and procedures put forward in homegrown jihadi magazines on how to do that, but was also trained in improvised explosives and had established 2 IEDs, improvised explosive devices,
in coolers
that would be detonated in support of his ramming, which then makes it a complex attack.
Yeah.
So And, you're going to see more of this. You're going to see more. We call them lone wolf attacks. I think that's a dangerous thing to do, because what it does is it causes law enforcement and the intelligence community to dismiss this as an isolated attack, right?
Yeah.
When in reality, it's not. It's a distributed attack that is an economy of force used by any terror group worth their salt, using surrogates to do their bidding. And again, this is another shaping operation.
Mm-hmm.
If there are deeply embedded deep cover operatives watching this, cells, they can watch how this attack goes down. In fact, Sarah is on record as saying that much of her reporting indicates that there will be these surrogate type attacks of lone wolves prior to a more organized, effective, complex attack by hardcore operatives. Mm-hmm. So could even be these are indicators softening and shaping operations. But again, they're just dismissed as lone wolf attacks. So you don't even have that kind of analysis from the veteran population migrating into the IC, where there's collaborative crosstalk going on. So yeah, that's basically how I see New Orleans and these other attacks that have happened. They're not isolated in my mind. They are part of a broader scheme of maneuver. It's just that they're distributed in nature. It's one person acting on behalf of this other, but whether they're trained in a glossy magazine, online, or in a madrasa, who cares? The reality is, if those IEDs had gone off, we would be probably having a much different conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in the book, you talk about things that people can do to prepare, and specifically what they should do on the ground in local communities. Talk about that for a second.
I want to start by saying I am not qualified to tell people what to do in a terror attack. I'm not. I am trained to some degree as a special operator. It's been a lot of years. I use some of those skills still. I go to the range and things like that for my own individual proficiency, but I am woefully underqualified to speak to and I would recommend someone like Doron on your show, and I can make the introduction.
Love to have him.
Is still a practitioner, or Boone.
Yeah, love to have Boone too.
Boone is amazing, and it much more suited, and perhaps even and I'm just making suggestions, Mike, like Boone and Sheriff Naco. My interview with him's coming out soon, from the Pasco County Sheriff's Office, who has very open-minded view on the role veterans and communities should play with law enforcement in this terror threat. He takes it very seriously. That could be a very cool conversation. Now, all that to say, there are a few things that I do think I am qualified to talk about. So one is, there's no reason that if you take any of this seriously, the same way that you would, to me, it's like if you live in a hurricane zone and you're like, or you live in Santa Barbara and you're like, wildfire, right? Mm-hmm. But, if you live, anywhere besides like this log cabin that I'm in the middle of horse country, like, you might take this seriously and go, okay, you know what? At a minimum, I'm going to read the threat template in here, and I'm going to read the case studies. Because here's the thing. If you just look at the 8 case studies of localized complex attacks where we live, work, and play, and then the analysis that follows, and then what to think about as an individual and community leader, you got it. Like, that is, in my assessment, the most important thing to do immediately, is to start to get a sense of how have they done it in the past. If I were going to, for example, if I were going to go back into Afghanistan as a Green Beret and deal with the Taliban or whatever, I would start by reading about what they've been doing. Right. And the thing is, these guys will tell us they show us what they're doing. They show us what they're thinking. These case studies, my partner on this case study is one of the most proficient lessons learned leaders in the special operations community. Right. So this is not amateur hour. These things, if you just read those, then read the individual and community thoughts. That's my first thing. Is like, it starts with informing yourself on scenario-based thinking. I want to inform my thinking based on what the analysis is and the scenarios that have already happened. Those two things, now that's power. That gives me now I'm not wondering, I'm not in panic mode, I'm not chicken little. I have an informed view of what could be. And frankly, what has been very recently in other places. So now I can start to go, all right, let's look at Mumbai. Let's look at October 7. Let's look at the Mandalay shooting in Vegas. What things are starting to drop out? Well, concerts, large venues where people live, work, and play. I'm going to start to look at that. I'm going to start to ask myself some hard questions.
Yeah.
Right. Am I really going to that concert? If I am, how am I thinking when I go to that? Now that's where I think guys like Boone and others could contribute more than me. All I'm saying is before you go buy your Glock and your AK and your trick out your vest and your anti-hemorrhaging kit. And I'm not making light of it. Like I get it, but how about you just read the analysis and look at scenario-based case studies to say, all right, this is kind of what the individual and collective requirement would look like if my neighborhood 1 mile from Houston were hit and there was systemic paralysis, first responders couldn't get to us, and armed thugs were roaming the neighborhood. Like, okay, that is, how do I harden my house? Do I have a safe room? Like, I just start there. I mean, and I think that what I'm excited about this book, even though I didn't want to write it, is I think it offers that. I think it offers the beginning of a responsible, pragmatic conversation for citizens. And then the other thing I'd say, Mike, and this is really important, whether you are a veteran or not, this whole, join me in the hills, only the hardcore will survive thing, I'm not a fan. I believe in the power of community, the power of the collective. And by the way, I believe in the power of the state. I believe in the power of the state to have a monopoly on violence. I believe in the Second Amendment, but I'm just saying, if you're going to collaborate with your community on how it defends itself or how it handles mass casualty, that needs to be a responsible, open conversation with local law enforcement. To me, and I don't think there should be, again, people may disagree with me, and I know they will, but I just don't see us at the point where we would have, now, should communities be able to do bottom-up things? Absolutely. But I would have those conversations about what the bottom-up things are with local law enforcement and emergency planners now. Create a private-public environment where you look at these scenarios and ask yourself, where did the government fail? Where did paralysis shut down the ability for ambulances to get into these places? There's people you could ask this. Okay. If that's the case, then let's look at our neighborhood. How many 18 Delta Special Forces medics? How many combat medics do we have? How many retired EMTs do we have? Is there an Iraqi war veteran or Afghan war veteran that can teach mass casualty and how we do it? That is, those to me are responsible conversations based on where the collective gaps reside in the institutions. But the only way to have that is a private public conversation, not like, Chicken Little, oh my God, I've got to head to the hills. I don't think that's the answer. And who wants to live that way?
Yeah. Well, and you got to get to know your neighbors, right? You got to get to know what their background is. And, one of the things I talked about at Stanford last week was stay in curiosity, stay out of judgment, right? Part of this is we need to be curious about each other. We need to be curious about where people, part of the reason we do this podcast, we get people's life stories, right? And specifically, we do that so that we can get to know our neighbors. We can get to know people better. And through our podcast, people can get to know other people better. Does that make sense? It's just, I feel like it's incredibly important that we focus on getting to know the people that are around us. They're where I used to live before I moved. I had a Navy SEAL right next to me, right? I've got a Navy SEAL across the street from me. I've got a former Navy SEAL 4 doors down. How do I know that? Because I had a conversation with him on a Saturday afternoon. But, and by the way, some of them are coming on the podcast, that kind of thing. So it's not a bad idea to get to know the old guy down the street, 4 doors down, could be a former medical doctor that's now retired. It could be a good idea to get to know who your neighbors are and who it is that you could be leaning on, and they could be leaning on you in case something happens where you have this systemic paralysis that they are gunning for. And let's be honest, if they're trying to accomplish this, October 7th told us they're going to be pretty good at it.
It's not
They've pretty much figured out how to make that work here.
Oh man, locking down first response is not hard.
Yeah.
It's not hard, and they know this. They know this, and locking down federal response is probably within the possibility as well. So we're not talking about like classified stuff here, like this, and it's been tested. They're watching it, and so the pragmatic thing to do is to have collaborative, multi-echelon conversations from citizen to community to state to local to federal around this problem. Right now, it's not happening. And that's why I hope guys and girls will get loud, like you're getting loud about this, and say, look, this is just having a responsible conversation that we should be having.
Yeah.
Like there's enough here. I mean, just the untended border for 4 years should be enough to have us doing this.
Totally agree.
Does anybody think that the, ICE raids are going to solve this problem? It's not. Like, it's just not. They're surgically necessary. The other thing that I would say to people too is, there's a lot of Afghans and other immigrants in this country who make this country really great.
Oh, yeah.
I will tell you what, there's Afghans that I know down in Texas, for example, and Florida that have fought and slung more lead for America than most Americans. And they are here, they're resettling. And so part of this too, this goes back to what I was saying earlier, Mike, is our ability to bridge across in groups and out groups. And it could be ethnic, it could be political, it could be religious. Man, those are the ones that we're going to be leaning on during these hard times. Those leaders who can bridge, those leaders who can engage. And if there's differences, fine. But the human connection's got to be there. The social capital's got to be there, because that is the fabric of a community, and the community is the linchpin to survive something like this. The divisionism is a tool of the terrorist.
You mind if I tell you a story?
If we're not careful, we become an unwitting surrogate of that.
I agree, 1000%. You mind if I tell you a story, since you're my master storyteller?
Sure.
So my son, years ago, decides to go to college at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln. Okay. And his first year there as a freshman is invited to Thanksgiving dinner at a friend's house. They go to this Thanksgiving dinner, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people at this house. And this lady who owns this house just literally takes my son in and basically adopts him. Okay. I mean, this woman, if he got sick, she took care of him. If he was hungry, he came by and got food. I mean, he hung out there like it was his house. We called him her Nebraska mom, his Nebraska mom. Okay. And his senior year, he's ready to graduate. And we go back there and we take my mom, who at the time was 73 years old. We take my mother with us, and we go back there, and Michael is at his Nebraska mom's house. And we end up going to that house to see him, because he was going to be there for dinner and to hang out, and we weren't going to be able to see him at his place. So we go there specifically to we brought the party to him, so to speak, right? And one of the things that my mother wanted to do was she made us stop and get flowers for his Nebraska mom. Okay. So we get flowers, we go, we walk in, my mom gives his Nebraska mom a hug. There's tears, there's all kinds of emotion, right? And my mother is trying to thank this woman for mothering our boy for 4.5 years. Sorry. And one of the things that we wanted to do while we were there was we wanted to take her to dinner. So we took her to dinner at her favorite restaurant, and we sat with her, and she explained to us how she came to this country on a visa and ended up becoming a permanent resident alien, right? And eventually became a citizen. And how every year her husband stayed in their native country, and every year she had a choice. She could bring her husband or she could bring two kids. And every year she brought two kids. And she left her husband there for a number of years. And she sort of joked that her husband was sort of trying to figure out if she was ever going to bring him. You with me? She was Afghani. And probably one of the most special people you'll ever meet in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I want people to understand this. I want you to understand. I want you to get to know your neighbors. Okay. And I don't care where they're from. Okay. Just get to know them, because what you're going to find is the vast majority of people, and I'm talking a large percentage, are really good people who love their community, love their families. The sacrifices that this woman and her husband made to try to give these children a better life is just amazing. Absolutely amazing. She was an architect, trained architect in Afghanistan, came to the US and couldn't do the architect thing because they didn't honor the certifications and all that. And she decided to become a seamstress. She was a tailor. She tailored clothes. Took things in, expanded, whatever, fixed them, right? And she did that. Started her own business. Did that so that she could be available for the children that she was bringing over, and she could mother on them. I mean, absolutely an amazing story. Okay. I just want people to understand that your neighbors are really, really good people. And if you just stay curious and you stay out of judgment and you get to know them, you'll find what I'm talking about. There's treasure all around you. And I feel like it's incredibly important that people avail themselves of those relationships. Sorry, I'm on my soapbox.
Oh, it's a great, what's personal is universal. I mean, bad actors, terrorists, criminals, con artists, they exploit division and they run away from connection.
Yeah.
And that's the best antibody to any of this that we're talking about is human connection. And
Absolutely.
that is no joke. I've seen it in the most dangerous places on earth. The communities that were stable in Afghanistan that we worked in were the ones that were the most connected. And it is true everywhere. So that's the other thing is you look at you want to assess your threat, ask yourself, how divided is my community? How divided is my town? And that will tell you right away that is a bad actor's dream if it's deeply divided.
Totally agree. 1000%. Okay. scottmann.com, Pineapple Express.
Yep.
pineappleexpress.org. What is it? It's
I would just go to
Task Force Pineapple.
scottmann.com.
Task Force Pineapple.
Yeah. Task Force Pineapple.org.
Yeah. taskforcepineapple.org. scottmann.com. Any others?
Yeah, those are the two. No, I tell you one thing that we've started, I think you're a part of it. I hope people will go check it out, is I've started a leadership academy on the platform School, SKOOL. It's free. It's called the Scott Mann Leadership Academy. Maybe you can put the link if you just type that in, it'll pop up. It's free to join. A lot of stuff that we've talked about here, way beyond terrorism, human connection, reciprocity, storytelling, it's all in there. It's a great place for teens, for your development as a leader. We need a community like this where we can come around human connection and really dive into it. So that would be my other thing that it's really taken off, and I think people like it.
Just got level 5 yesterday, baby.
Nice. That's beautiful. It's really great. And
it really is. It's amazing.
Keep growing it. So yeah, scottmann.com and just get into school on our Scott Mann Leadership Academy, and everything else is there. You'll find everything else.
Yeah. Scott Mann, I cannot thank you enough for being our guest for the third time on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been awesome, brother.
It's my honor, Mike. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks again. Tell Monty I said hi, will you?
Well.
Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.